Hi everyone, welcome to Dear BAMf, the show for PR and marketing pros like you, hosted by Beck Bamberger of BAM. BAM is a communications agency that believes stories move the world. We move stories forward for technology-driven brands that challenge, change, and create entire industries. Today, on the Dear BAMf podcast, we're talking with Jonny Steel, VP of Marketing at Payoneer. Jonny is a marketing and business development professional with experience in initiating and negotiating strategic partnerships at a senior level in online marketing, retail, and finance sectors. Let's dive in.
Hey everyone, welcome to Dear BAMf, the podcast for journalists and marketers such as yourself, where we cover interesting, gnarly questions that you have about the jobs that we do day in and day out. We are well into season 2 here, having a great time with all of our guests. And speaking of today, as you guys just heard, we have Jonny Steel from Payoneer on. Hi, Jonny.
Hi, Beck. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having us. Thanks for being here. Where are you recording from right now in this quarantine time? Yes.
Yeah, well, I'm right now based outside Tel Aviv in Israel.
Okay.
I'm originally from London, but I moved out to Israel around about 15 years ago. And I used to travel all over the world through the year, but my very last trip that I made abroad was back in February 2020, and it was to China, of all places, just before the pandemic started to spread.
Wow. What a last place to have on your passport. What was that for? Just business travel?
Yeah, that's right. We have a pretty big presence in China, big team, and a lot of customers. So I was out there meeting customers and spending time with the team.
Man, those are the days. Now, okay, before we get into a little background of you, do you miss all the globe trotting that you did in this role?
The bit that I don't miss is the traveling bit, going on the planes and going through the airports. It's exhausting, and I certainly feel that I can be a lot more productive and get a lot done from being in one place. What I do miss is seeing colleagues and seeing customers. I believe that there's something in that face-to-face contact that simply cannot be replicated through Zoom and other tools. When we bring hundreds of customers together at one of our customer events, there's something in the air, there's an experience and a connection that you can build that you just simply can't do even when you try with virtual conferences and the like.
I agree. I think everyone's believing that too, which is nice to remember so that we can all uphold that and kind of know like, oh yeah, let's get back to travel. That's good. You know?
For sure. We're human beings at the end. And
we are
thirsty for that type of content.
We are. Well, before we get into our questions that we have, do you want to give us a 60 seconds on what Payoneer is actually about?
Of course. Well, Payoneer, if you haven't heard of us yet, I'm sure you will soon. Payoneer's been around for 15 years. We connect the world together on a single platform, making it as easy to do business globally as you can locally. So we're built around a payment platform. But on top of that, we've built so many commerce enabling services that help businesses of any size, from a small business, an individual entrepreneur or freelancer in an emerging market, through to the biggest brands in tech like Google, Facebook, Amazon, Airbnb, to make and receive payments globally and grow their business into new markets.
Sounds like you've been doing this a while, Jonny, given that wonderful overview. I love it. Crisp and clean. Okay, so what are you most proud of, would you say, in the last 12-ish months in your role? You've been there a couple of years, so I'm sure you have lots of stories, but anything in particular you're proud about so we could brag about you?
Well, I've been at Payoneer for 6.5 years. So it's actually a nice period of time where I've been part of really taking the company and the brand global, building up our presence. We're now in 24 locations worldwide, and marketing has a real presence in onboarding and having that relationship with our customers all over the world. In the last 12 months, and we've been through this incredible, strange world that I don't think anybody was ever prepared to enter. We had to get a feel for it very early on because, as I mentioned, we have a large business in China, and the pandemic hit China well before the rest of us in the US, in Europe, and other places ever thought that it could possibly touch us. So already in China, we were experiencing the business starting to slow down, as in our largest type of business in China are international e-commerce merchants who are selling abroad. So the supply chain started to get affected, and our team were figuring out how the hell do we support our customers when we can't be going into the office each day. And then from there, we had to, as it spread around the world, we had to adapt. And one of the big things that we've always done at Payoneer is having that face-to-face contact with our customers. We typically in a year organize 30 customer conferences around the world in 30 different cities across developed and emerging markets. When that all came to a freeze, we had to figure out how can we fill that gap and continue to have that contact with customers. And that's where we pivoted very quickly towards digital connections. We started with a lot of webinars and webinar series. We then moved into virtual conferences and reached our peak. And I think my proudest moment of 2020 was when we put on a 24-hour virtual conference for our customers worldwide. So we literally followed the sun, starting at one time and continuing through all the time zones with nonstop content, nonstop networking and opportunities to learn how to grow your business. I stayed awake for, I think, about 22 hours of it.
I was going to ask if you did the whole thing. Oh my God, that's
I passed
crazy.
out for a little bit in the middle, but yeah, it was an incredible experience to engage with customers from all over the world in one 24-hour period.
Yeah. When you are so global, that is an interesting thing to think about in time zones, because now you don't have everybody in the same time zone. How do you get the content to be striking at the right time the whole entire time? So kudos to you guys. Just say, oh, well, we'll just do it 24 hours. Oh my God. Did you come up with that? Whose crazy idea was that?
I think it was a member of the team. All the best ideas come from a member of the team, not from me. We've got a very talented bunch of people here and they come up with crazy ideas. And I think as a leader, the important thing to do there is to nurture these crazy ideas. Don't be the first one to say that's impossible or that's stupid, to entertain the idea, to start to figure out what could be the potential in this, then move on to analyzing what the risks are and the obstacles that we need to overcome, and then figure out whether it's feasible to do it. And from a crazy idea that I think it was a relatively new member of the team came up with, before long we had a whole team as well as external agency working with us to make sure that it was a huge success, and it was.
That's really something. Dang. Okay. Well, kudos to you for that. Is there a way you're telling stories now in particular that you are favoriting, especially given the global audience you're working with?
I think the way that we tell stories at Payoneer has been fairly consistent over the last few years, but maybe even more so now, which is we try and tell the Payoneer story through the experiences of our customers worldwide. Let me explain what I mean by that.
Yeah.
We feel that the best way to talk about what it is that we do and the difference that we make is to put the focus on customers. And we have a large number of these small businesses all over the world, as well as the large enterprises that use us. And we do a lot of customer stories and talk about their business journey. We really try and celebrate entrepreneurship. And, one of our big things is about democratizing opportunity and access to global growth opportunities and skills. And so what we try and do is, feature, even on our homepage, if you go to Payoneer.com, the first thing you'll see will be pictures of customers. And each one of them,
I saw that, yes.
Right, you'll see stories about how many of them started from nothing, started with an idea or even a family business selling in a market in India, for example, and how the younger generations came in and saw the opportunity to take that business digital, to start selling online, perhaps domestically initially, and then exploring, we've got an amazing array of products which are locally manufactured in India, that surely there must be consumers around the world that are interested in it. How do we get there? And if they tell that story of how, starting from maybe even handicraft and something really traditional from within their family, and how they took that digital and how they took that global, there's no better way than that to tell the Payoneer story of what we're trying to do. We are precisely trying to empower that entrepreneur to build their business in that way. So, it's for us, storytelling is all about focusing it on the stories of our customers.
Mm-hmm. Especially for B2B companies, you got to leverage those stories from actual people, because it's always about people. Oh, I love that. Jonny, we got some hairy questions to get into. So I'm going to start with the first one if you're ready.
Yeah, fire away.
Let's do it. Dear BAMf, my startup has now 4 international markets, and we're making our way into a 5th this year, which is exciting as we approach an IPO in the next couple of years. For context, I'm the head of all comms for our team of more than 1,000 people. My question surrounds our branding and the image it conveys. I'm concerned about slipping up on anything culturally inappropriate. I just brought on a social media agency to do our global brand social media, and they have offices in all our markets. Nothing bad has happened yet, and I've been here for more than a year. How do I proactively look and defend against any situation that could get us in hot water? With how constant social media is, I do not want to be in a bad situation. Jonny, what say you?
Well, first, congrats on the story so far. I mean, this is really exciting. Yes. You're a sizable company looking towards an IPO, expanding into new geographies. This sounds like very high-class problems to have, and it's good that you're actually thinking now to preempt any types of problems or mistakes to be made later on. I've had similar experience to what you're describing. Payoneer is a truly global business. We actually built the infrastructure from day one to serve businesses all over the world. But from a marketing and sales perspective, we weren't built to be able to really serve those customers. We just localized the platform, translated it, and let customers self-serve. As we started to build it up, I did things in a certain order. And the order that we did things at Payoneer was, we got somebody within the team that was from that local market. Now, in the earlier days, we hired people in our hubs. So our head office is in New York City. We had a couple of other major hubs worldwide. We put one in Hong Kong. And so we would often try and hire somebody who was originally, if we were targeting, say, the Japan market, we would hire a Japanese marketing manager that would be based in one of those hubs that would serve the market. And that gave us a sense of security that we had somebody who was a real expert that understood the local sensitivities and understood our business and our story. And that's where we started from. And one of the very first things that whenever we hired one of those local marketing managers or community managers, as we called them as well, was to get them to just engage with as many customers as possible. So one of the first things they would do is reach out to our most active customers from that market who had discovered us and just start talking to them, understand where they came from, what they heard about us, how they were using us, where they go to consume content, which events they go to. That way we got far more familiar with that local market that we were already serving, and that gave us a lot more intelligence about how to go out and expand there. So when we did try and expand, and often what we would do initially is we would just take our global messaging and our global campaigns and just simply translate it and put it out there. We had this local expert in-house that was there to be able to guide us and make sure we didn't slip up. And we did make mistakes. We made mistakes along the way. You can even make a mistake as careless as one that we did, which was in a campaign targeting a certain country. It was actually targeting India in our very early days of starting to serve that country, where we didn't have any team in India at the time. We did a campaign where the graphic design for the ad was a map of India and the borders were drawn incorrectly. And that can be a very sensitive matter.
Oh, yeah.
And you have to be super cautious on things like that. And it was a mistake, an honest mistake. We took it down, we apologized, and then we made sure that we learned an important lesson from that. So it sounds like you're on the right tracks in taking on board a global agency. My approach was more, I like to have people that are in-house that really get it. And when I hear about agencies with presence all over the world, you have to really try and make sure that, do I have real expertise in these local markets, and do I have a real connection with them, as opposed to an agency that really has expertise in fewer geographies and some types of partnerships in others. And if at all possible, I think you mentioned that there are 1,000 employees. If you've got 1,000 employees and you're trying to expand into 2 or 3 new geographies, I think you've probably got room within your global team there to have 1 or 2 experts from those local markets, whether they're actually based in that local market or sitting right next to you in your headquarters, but originally from there, speaking the language, and can be your eyes and ears to make sure you get it right. So it's good that you're thinking about this. It can be something you have to be careful about. You can always just try and translate what you do, but if you look at Payoneer's marketing today, the way we go to market in all these different geographies where we have a real marketing strategy, it is a very localized message that is targeted towards the customers there, takes into account local sensitivities, and really tells a story according to our global guidelines and our global message, but with a local twist.
Yes. And it sounds like you're deploying people who are native to those markets with your community managers and such. Would you say that's true? Because I think that's so important.
100%. It's nice when you got someone who has a second language or a third language, but it's not the same. If you're trying to crack whether it's a Western European market, you're trying to crack Germany or France, or you're trying to crack Vietnam or Thailand, you really need somebody that's from there.
That's really just to think to the point you made with the map of India, the borders. There's just so much nuance to cultures. that I think we've seen gazillions of brands fall flat on their face with, thinking like, oh, we just parachute in our people. Like, we're just going to do that thing. And they don't have the context that is so necessary from a perspective. I hope other brands are listening to this, Jonny. So they know, like, get the community people who are in the community, who've been raised in the community, have all that context that you just get after being born and raised in a place. It's just how it is.
For sure. Also, when you're looking at social media engagement as well, where it's totally real time, it's a little bit more casual than the product communications itself. And that's where you can totally spot the difference between messaging that has just simply gone to one of the translation agencies and been put out there and something that's really been localized and given a special twist.
Well, next question. Dear BAMf, it's no secret that, here we go with podcasts. It's no secret that podcasts are a great vehicle to boost brand awareness and thought leadership. My client wants me to put an emphasis on pitching and securing podcast opportunities for the company's CEO, and is also looking for tips on how to start their own podcast. To be honest, I don't know where to start. What are the best ways for uncovering the right person to pitch at a podcast? And with so many podcasts currently available, how can you determine which ones provide real value? Also, any tips for creating your own podcast? How big of an undertaking is this? And what are some key considerations to think of before kicking off this type of initiative? Wow, this person has a lot in here. So let's see what we can unpack. Go ahead, Jonny.
Well, I feel that of the two of us, I'm the less qualified to even answer this question. Hey. You're the host of a podcast, not me.
Yes, that's okay.
What I will say about podcasts is that it's the channel of communication, the media that has really come through in the last few years and playing such a significant role in the way that we consume content today. And I think even just my day to day, whether it's the way what I do when I'm exercising, what I do when I'm commuting, to me, it's all about podcasts, and I know which podcasts I like to listen to for my own interests. I also know when I've got my business and I'm targeting customers, I try and also tap into the podcasts that I believe that they're listening to and try and make sure that I'm really kept totally up to date with the type of information that they're looking to hear. So, the first thing I would say is when you want to know which podcast to be on and try and get your CEO on, try and figure out what your customers are listening to. If you're not at day one where you have 0 customers, assuming you have a customer base already, talk to them. And it's what I've answered to the previous question as well, is that you just have to get that closer contact to your customers. Don't be shy. Reach out to them. Our community managers would send an email to a bunch of very active customers and say, I would love to have a chat with you a bit about where you get information from, which events you go to, and find out. The question today is, what podcast do you listen to? So you really want to make sure that you are figuring out what interests them, and you might have different personas of customers that you're targeting, those that maybe are your existing customers, but you're looking to expand into new verticals or new types of job descriptions. So really try and understand, who you're targeting and what they listen to. So that's the first thing. It really isn't rocket science. And in many cases, what I've discovered is, there are these really popular podcasts, the likes of the New York Times Daily, which is listened to crazy numbers. Yes. But sometimes for your business, it might actually be the niche podcasts, the ones that are really specific to your vertical, that do a really good job. They've been around for a bit of time. They've built up a reputation. And, if you're serving global freelancers, or you're serving e-commerce merchants selling internationally, these are two of the verticals that we focus on largely, then it could well be the niche podcast with much smaller listeners, but really, really relevant to the target market. Those are the ones you want to get closer to. And in many ways, these are often much easier podcasts to be able to get a guest appearance on. Sometimes these podcasts, it's not so easy. And if you're new to the game, you've got to really try and prove that your CEO has some real value to bring to the podcast. Nobody's interested in having a guest on their podcast solely because this guest wants to get themselves a bit of exposure and be able to sell their product. They want to get a guest on because they believe the guest has got some value to share. So if you can raise the profile of your CEO already by having some thought leadership out there, get them active on social media, get them active on LinkedIn, posting their own thoughts, get them published in other leading top tier publications through working with your PR firm, then it's going to be a lot easier to be able to pitch your CEO in as a genuine thought leader that's got something interesting to say. So if you're building your own podcast, you're really going to have to focus on a few areas. One area is going, in my eyes, you've got to go all in. You've got to be really committed. You can't just make a half measure because you'll absolutely fail with the amount of competition that's out there. You've got to think what's unique and make sure that you're bringing content that is something different from what's out there before. You want to get great guests on your podcast. So dig deep into your contact list of partners or those that you know that you've worked with in the past that can bring something special. If you can get a big name on there through one way or another, that will really help you get started. And then you're going to have to work really hard to get the listeners. You're going to have to advertise. You're going to have to spread the word out there to all of your connections or your customer base. And it will take time. And if you stick with it and you've got good content, I'm sure you'll succeed.
Yes, I agree with everything you've noted, with the extra caveat for this person to consider two lanes here. First, it sounds like you have this client who's like, do everything, get me on all of them, let's start one, and all these ideas. It's like, okay. Perhaps consider starting with securing some spots to be on. Launching one, procuring the guests, preparing for it, editing it, all this stuff is a whole production. I'm speaking from firsthand experience that is not to be lightly considered at all. I have a whole team here, for example, that's doing this. So it's not just, your CEO client's time for, just hop on there. So there's so many other pieces of that. So instead, I would just counsel this person to say, instead of going head deep and saying, oh my gosh, yeah, let's now compete in this very competitive landscape, how about secure and see the results of securing the guest spots for these folks on the podcast? And then, by the way, that's content you can also use and squeeze. So once you have your CEO on that, you can take the recording, you can take snippets of it, use that for social, use it for further thought leadership. As mentioned on this podcast, you can snip all that content here, there, and whatever. And you didn't have to do anything about that in terms of producing it, editing it, all this other stuff. So that would just be my salient advice here is go first with securing the podcast so that then you can consider after if you'd like to get into this in some big shape or form. I will say the podcast analytics, the attribution, all the stuff that is in the landscape now is a growing market with a lot of players coming up. Chartable is one of those examples, chartable.com. We're recording this on Zencastr, which is the platform to record. It doesn't do the analytics, but allows you to do these easily from abroad. So there's no dearth of tools that are out there for you to do it. It's just really the time and all the people that it's going to take to do it. So start with the bookings, get on that, and see how that goes before you dip your toe into this.
As I said at the beginning, do what Beck says. She's there.
Thanks, Jonny. Yes, I'm speaking from firsthand here. Okay, Jonny, we have one last one here. Dear BAMf, my client is sitting on a gold mine of user data that would be perfect for pitching unique story angles, but it always feels like we're pulling teeth to get it. We end up missing out on story angles because of it. How do you suggest working with a client like this who is always late to get us the data we need for a timely pitch? This is not the first time I've heard this sob story.
I want to say fire the client, but that's not normally the way things go, right? Find yourself a better client that really wants coverage. Yeah. Look, I mean, I've had the pleasure in my career to work in a few different companies where we've had such rich data. And I think data, if you've got rich data, it's one of the greatest tools for landing coverage and for being able to tell a story. One of my earlier roles that I had was in a startup called My Supermarket, which was a grocery comparison website. We launched it originally in the UK, where there were 4 major chains at the time of supermarkets. And we built this platform where you would be able to fill up your cart with everything you wanted. And we would show you how much that cart would cost across each of the supermarkets. And at the end of it, you would be able to check out from the cheapest one. We would offer you all sorts of substitutes to help you get the best deal on your cart. So that was the basic product. And it was a free service. So lots of online consumers were coming on, comparing, and then they were checking out, sending their cart to whichever retailer they wanted to check out from. They paid them. And the way we were going to monetize it was by selling the data. We had loads and loads of data around not only the pricing of products, but the way that consumers were willing to swap. How much saving would they have to step from the brand to the private label of the supermarket, and so on and so forth. So it was really rich data. And I was responsible for PR back then and working with an agency in London. What we realized was firstly, it was a nice story to be able to talk about grocery comparison and pricing and how to get best deals. But if we could package up that data and into interesting trends, we could always just pitch data the whole time to the media. So we would look at all sorts of strange things. We'd look at taking the UK and breaking up geographically and see which area of the country do consumers buy the most alcohol, which part of the country are these brands more popular than those brands. So you could use a bit of demographics there to tell an interesting story. And eventually the journalists were identifying that my supermarket was sitting on this bank of data that you could find out almost any type of trend and the way, what were people buying more of in the winter, what were they buying less of? And we were always looking for the counterintuitive story. We always wanted the story that's not the obvious, but actually the thing that surprises. So we had this great data and we were able to package it up. Now, you have to be able to move quickly to do that when journalists have an idea or a story, or you have an idea and a story, you've got to be able to get the data out there quickly. If your client is struggling to realize what they have there, I think sometimes you just need to find the right people in the organization. And it could be that if you're dealing with the head of PR or the head of marketing, and there might be somebody in the analytics side or in the data side that actually have their hand on the BI tools that are able to pull data more quickly, and just to show them that there might be someone else that would be able to step in to provide value. The only way that I think you're really going to get the buy-in is if you can get them to work with you. Maybe it's a story you can come up with which isn't time specific, and work with them, get that data, pitch it in, get the coverage for it, and then be able to go back to them and say, look at the great coverage we can get when we use data. We need to have that resource so that we're really aligned to be able to deliver on time. Because as we all know in PR, it's all about being at the right place at the right time.
Oh, is that not the truth? Yes. This is unfortunately an age-old question and conundrum as it relates to B2B companies that, we have all this data, we have all this stuff. And frankly, I can say this, we haven't completely solved this. I will say to what you're mentioning, Jonny, connect with the person beyond the PR, the comms person, because oftentimes, especially in companies that they get bigger and bigger, that comms team is a bit divorced from those data geeks that are just pumping along and doing their thing and reporting maybe to sales or other people. And they're a bit separate. So what we found is that we have to go straight to the source, which is going to the data people directly, having that inroad, and just basically interviewing them, talking to them and saying, okay, so what are you seeing? What are you doing? You don't need to look at data sheets as a comms person. That is just recipe for disaster. You're never going to find your way out of that. But what you can do is do these interviews. I kind of call it story mining. So we're working on kind of some structures for that, but story mining. And that's what you're doing. You're just casually talking to someone. You have your set questions, but you're digging to see, what could be out there? Because often, here's the other thing, they don't even know that there is something usable to be gained. So you have to dig in and ask them and go use all your best thinking tools to solicit what could be interesting. And then you could say, wait a minute, you have 2,000 users spread across the US on their shopping habits in Valentine's Day. Oh, hey, that's something we can use. And they go, oh, really? They are not usually aware. It's not their job to be the ones who are thinking of the stories necessarily. On wonderful, remarkable situations, you sometimes can find that person who's kind of that data storyteller who that could be useful. Now, those are gem people though. So don't be surprised if you're just talking to nerdy people who aren't seeing that connection. Your job is to translate and find the connection between the data. So biggest piece of advice for this one is get to the data people who are actually sitting on it, because your comms contact is clearly not getting in. And that's okay. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes there's stuff in the politics or whatever else. You don't even know what's going on. But see if you can get in front of those people just for some casual interviews. I'm sure you will find something.
And I think as the marketing organization in 2021 continues to develop, you increasingly have data people within marketing. And it might be that their role is slightly different. They might be more on the acquisition side. We often lean on within our CRM team. We have an analyst that's there measuring segments and measuring the performance of campaigns, very, very, very strong on the data. So we will often lean on him to help with this side of things. So in the modern organization, modern marketing organization, you don't even necessarily have to go outside of it. But you might want to just make sure that your analyst within the team understands that their role expands and extends into being able to do this kind of data storytelling. And as you said, you don't always get the person that has both the storytelling and the data skills. But if you've got two of them that can work together quite closely, you could be onto something.
then that's amazing. Grab that person quick. That's what I would. Don't look back. Don't look back. Oh, man. Jonny, thank you so much for being on today. These were a good, juicy set of questions, and I think we covered them pretty well, if I do say so myself.
I really enjoyed listening to these stories, and I think all of these people that send in the questions are doing great stuff and thinking about the right things. And good luck. I hope these bits of feedback turn out to be helpful.
Are helpful. You got it. Jonny, thanks again so much. Everybody, we'll see you on the next episode for more juicy questions. There's no lack of more of these questions coming about. So we'll see you next time. Thanks, Jonny.
Cheers. Thanks, Vic.
Thanks for listening to Dear BAMf, the advice podcast for PR and marketing pros like you. Our show was created by BAM, a PR and marketing agency headquartered in San Diego and New York City. The music you're enjoying today was composed by Tiffany Dizon, produced by Daniel Kessner, and played by San Diego Symphony's Art of Alon. If you have a tough PR and marketing question you'd like us to answer, write to us at bamtheagency.com/Dear BAMf. Don't forget the F. If you'd like to get notified of our latest episodes, subscribe to us wherever you listen to podcasts and review us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts.